Hi, my name is Sierra Mansker, and today I'm going to talk to you about how my copyright lesson fits in with the Assure model. So let's go ahead and play from the start. So Assure is an acronym, and the A stands for Analyze Learners. So in this particular context of which I would be giving this copyright lesson, depending upon the class that would be visiting me or me into their class, there's going to be 12 to 24 students per class of 7th and 8th grade students. I'd be going through their language arts classrooms, so that's why sometimes the amount of students is fairly low. I think the smallest class we have is about 9 kids. I'd likely push those 9 kids into the other class though, so that way I could teach, both classes at the same time. There are a mixed population of varying needs. While we do have what's considered honors classes, most of our students are intermixed, and therefore there are students who are high performing or labeled as gifted, and there are also students who have other educational needs via their different individualized education plans. And so without knowing, because I'm not their classroom teacher, the specific needs of the students, it is important that I incorporate opportunities for students to learn the information in different ways. And so you see that in my presentation where I go over the information through a slideshow just like this, but I also try to implement the visual components and videos within the lesson as well to reiterate the same information using different words, but also those visual cues help students process the information. So I like to use the different graphics as well as within the actual slideshow itself. You could see that I used a lot of vibrant colors because I know that colors are grabbing of attention. And so that is my attempt to diversify the lecture for the needs of our students. I also wanted to preview the important vocabulary because I know that students have a higher success rate whenever they are able to preview the most important vocabulary, and so, just so they have a background information or we're activating that prior knowledge, but also so that way they know what is important just from the very get-go. So this makes it very clear what the objectives are and what I expect them to learn. Throughout the video of my lesson plan, I give digestible summarizations so that way the students can understand in their terms what the different copyright terms means. So I make sure that it's not just a bunch of text, or if there is a lot of text, it's one sentence, little blurbs, so that way it is digestible for them to understand and then turn around and implement. The first S in Assure stands for state standards and objectives. I pulled this straight from our TEKS resources. Of course, there are other resources that talk about the framework for student learners when it comes to utilizing technology. But to me, in the state of Texas, this is going to be the first place that I would go to because it is the state standard. And here you can see where I just copied and pasted the state standard of digital citizenship. And under the band of digital citizenship, we see that students are expected to understand copyright principles, including current laws, fair use guidelines, Creative Commons, open source, and public domain. Underneath that is also the B one, where it says practice ethical acquisition of information and standard methods for citing sources. I do talk quite a bit about citing sources, so I wanted to be sure to include that as well. But we are really focusing on that A band right there. And then the objective for class, we use an AVID method. So this is what I would have them write down in their agenda, where we would, before I got started talking, write down, we will understand how to ethically and responsibly use other people's creations and our own creations. And then I'd talk about that through the use of the copyright presentation. The second S stands for selected strategies and resources. So this is where I pay attention to what I'm selecting for the different strategies and resources. I selected quite a bit of information from our textbook that we use in 5720. So that particular textbook helps me quite a bit. I also have viewed quite a few videos, and it is part of the yearly certificates that you have to go through at the beginning of the year as a Texas teacher, where you have to watch the different copyright modules and answer the questions. So I'm fairly used to operating with copyright information. And so I used all of that information to then create the digestible lesson that you saw. The information was intended to be given to be thorough and student friendly. So that was the strategy I was looking for: thoroughness and student friendly. And the way that I did that was using videos that were appropriate for students in both length and content, as well as making sure that the presentation itself was intended to be one that strategically grabbed the attention of students. The way that I'd utilize resources, because U is the next letter there in the Assure model, is that students will need their Chromebooks to complete this lesson. Now, they won't need it during the lecture part, but they will need it during the part where they create their own presentation based off of the components of copyright. Students will be paired in up to groups of 4. I like to use groups for students because I often find that when they have an accountability partner, and that is how I address it when we go into groups, they do a better job of staying on task and making sure to account for the other one. So that way they are both doing what I need them to do and accomplishing their tasks. Up to groups of 4, I typically wouldn't put groups of 4 together, but if I know that this group works together, if they're 2 pairs sitting at the same table, then I will allow that. Technology is certainly needed for the teacher in order to give the lecture at first, and internet access will also be needed because of the videos that are utilized. And when we're utilizing all of these resources, the whys for the copyright are given throughout the presentation. And what I mean by that is when we're using the resources, there is a constant reiteration of why we're learning this, of why it's important and how we can implement it, and why we need to make sure that we understand copyright to use it appropriately. R's require learner participation. Now, you don't see this in the video itself because it's a lecture, but at the conclusion of the lecture, students, like I said, will then create their own presentation of what the copyright is and why it's important. At that point in time, as the teacher, I would be more of the facilitator, walking around the groups, making sure to help with any technical questions that they have or any content questions that they have. They are required to use images and cite their sources to be able to prove their understanding of both copyright and citing. And E for evaluate and revise. So how it will be evaluated is that students will complete that presentation task according to a rubric that I created. The rubric I created will be included in the Word document that you use to access this video. So if you just scroll down, you'll see it right there. It's actually quite large because there's a few different areas that I wanted to make sure that students really honed in on. The first 2 are, of course, our biggest ones is the use of graphic and the graphic sources. So we want to make sure that they're using graphics and that they know how to cite their sources accurately. That third one is content accuracy. Again, we're looking for the accuracy of that copyright information and making sure that students really know and can prove that they know what the copyright laws are. The text is for being able to read their text, and text and background kind of go hand in hand in that often students don't have the realization until they're being evaluated on it that their presentation needs to be seen very well and that it needs to look professional. And so having 2 different areas there where there's an evaluative part of the presentation that they create allows for them to see beforehand that they will be graded on those, so they can account for that when they're creating their presentation. Spelling and grammar is the same thing with text and background. We want to make sure that they are presenting themselves professionally. Originality is a piece that I want to evaluate because I want to make sure that students are producing their own work and not just copying things that they see off of the internet. Sequencing of information is important as an underlying standard, mostly because students need to purposely sequence their information so that way it makes sense for the audience. This, I say it's underlining because we see this often in their writing as well, even in when they're creating their fiction assignments, like a short story. We want to make sure that we're still, I just left the word just left my brain. Sorry. We want to make sure that we're still supporting that idea of, sequencing of information, cause and effect, what should go next, what makes the most logical sense. Cooperation, of course, we want to make sure that they are working well in their groups and that they're holding each other accountable. And then effectiveness is really like that catch-all overall. How effective were you at presenting the copyright topics given to you? Thank you for listening. Bye.